وعد الله الذين آمنوا منكم وعملوا الصالحات ليستخلفنهم في الأرض كما استخلف الذين من قبلهم وليمكنن لهم دينهم الذي ارتضى لهم وليبدلنهم من بعد خوفهم أمنا يعبدونني لا يشركون بي شيئا ومن كفر بعد ذلك فأولئك هم الفاسقون.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, our dear viewers, and jazakallah khair for joining us once again on this show on Al-Waqiyah. Now, the suffering of our ummah in Palestine continues day after day. Each day we hear more news of buildings being destroyed, of lives being lost, of attacks on our brothers and sisters in the blessed land. When this most recent activity or this most recent series of attacks and oppression against the ummah began in Ramadan, there was a good deal of activism in the form of social media posts and petitions and protests all around the world. It was something highly publicized. Yet now, although the situation remains a grave and difficult situation of suffering for our ummah in Palestine, the activism itself seems to have died away to an extent, and social media and protests have become more and more silent. So today we look at what is the place of activism in this situation and where should we be directing our energies. With me today to help discuss this is Brother Uthman. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you well, yeah.
Alhamdulillah, okay. So as I just said, brother, when in Ramadan, I'm sure you'll remember when all this started happening, Masjid al-Aqsa, in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, the Masjid al-Aqsa itself was attacked, and then our brothers and sisters in other places in Palestine were attacked, and the Zionist oppressors increased their oppression of the Ummah. There was a good deal of noise on social media. There were protests in schools, protests in the streets and cities around the world. We don't seem to see that so much anymore, but the atrocities continue and they haven't lessened. So, to start off with, I want to ask you, was all that activism, all that effort, all that energy, was it all a waste?
أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي جزاك الله خير. No, it wasn't a waste. I wouldn't say that at all. It's achieved certain things, right? Every protest or social media post or petition that has been done in the correct way with the correct message has, led the ummah towards, reaching a certain milestone that we may not have seen, in the previous flare-up. And maybe we can get into it a bit more further on in the discussion. But this time round, in terms of the protests, especially social media, from what I've seen myself, from what a lot of other people have analysed and observed, is that the call, the message of the youth this time round has been quite different to the previous round of 2014, 2012, 2008, etc. So I wouldn't say it's a waste at all. Of course, it's...
You just mentioned how the social media response was different, how we've reached a new milestone. Could you expand on that a little bit? What has been different about the response this time? What milestone has been reached this time that wasn't reached previously?
Yeah, so, previously maybe you found that there was merely a share, a comment, it's so bad what's happening in Palestine, or a comment, free Palestine, or a comment of, like a broken heart emoji, and a sad face, which is, it shows that the Ummah is connected to what's happening in Palestine, but it doesn't really have a vision further than that, right? Further than slogans, further than emotions. This time round, and again, maybe we can touch on that a bit further. And this time round, you saw the difference in the message that the Ummah is carrying, to a large extent. So, for example, as we mentioned before in our previous discussion of the video of the Muslims in Palestine calling on the Pakistan army to liberate them, that made rounds on social media, and that really, the youth connected with that. That was a message that really kind of revered, around the platform of the youth. They were commenting, where is the Pak army? Where is the Turkish army? They were calling out Erdogan and Imran Khan on social media, as mentioned before. So I think the nature of the message this time round isn't just emotions or sadness or slogans. The Ummah is starting to now voice its opinion of what it believes to be a proper solution to Palestine, to put it away once and for all. And I think that is a milestone in and of itself, that the Ummah is working or calling for an Islamic solution, maybe not everybody, but a very, very distant section of the youth in the Ummah is calling for a proper, real, genuine Islamic solution that will actually see Palestine liberated once and for all. I don't think we saw that in the previous flare-ups, or maybe in the previous social media and protest campaigns.
Jazakallah khair. So definitely there's, I think what you're saying, I don't think anyone can disagree with that the call for that message is different this time. But isn't it true to say that the result is the same as it's always been? That things go back to the unfortunate status quo of our brothers and sisters being oppressed in Palestine, regardless of what we say over here?
Well, no, again, I wouldn't say that it kind of is wasted effort in that sense. Yes, up until we reach liberation from occupation, then of course the Muslims in Palestine are still going to be oppressed, no doubt. But in terms of going back to the frame of mind, or the way that the Ummah view this problem prior to the flare-up, no, I would say that's not the case at all. Before this whole, I don't want to keep using the word flare-up, or maybe this recent incident. Before this recent incident, the Ummah may not have been courageous enough, or maybe not have been determined or motivated or convinced enough that this is the correct solution. After this, when you see videos of Muslims in Palestine calling for the Islamic solution, that really motivates and energizes the youth living in the West, living in the rest of the world, to say, hang on a minute, we've always thought this. We've always mentioned this in our, personal friendships or personal gatherings. And now that it's hit mainstream social media, now that almost every single, person that is on social media or that is active, an activist in their own right, has come across this message that has reached a certain milestone now. Because before this, there may have only been the case of, UN lobbying your MPs, calling for a two-state solution. That fourth option, or that the Islamic option of liberation, military liberation, political liberation from a genuine Islamic authority, that option was never really there before. It was never really discussed before. This time round, that was mainstream. I would argue this time round that was the most popular or the most common solution that people were calling for, or people were at least researching into and looking into. So no, I wouldn't say that we've gone completely back to status quo. Of course, like I mentioned before, up until we get genuine liberation of course oppression will still exist. But in terms of the Ummah, kind of getting closer and closer, and more clarity and crystallization in their message, that is a huge good in itself. It's a huge step in the right direction.
Jazakallah khair. But the same things that we saw, more or less, not exactly the same, but the similar scenes that we saw happening in Ramadan that caused this burst of emotion and reaction from people, it's still happening. You can open the news today and see the houses that have been demolished this morning. Also the videos of our sisters in Masjid al-Aqsa who were harassed yesterday or the day before. Why do you think it is that there seems to be fatigue in that activism, that we're not seeing the scale of response that we've seen previously when this stuff kicked off a few months ago?
Yeah, I mean, of course, when it was kicking off in Ramadan, arguably, you could say that it was at a grander scale or a bigger scale, which is no excuse for us to switch off now at all. But it was at a larger scale. More people were being killed. There were missile strikes to and fro. Even though, of course, we know it was a completely lopsided genocide or attempted genocide. But the whole kind of I wouldn't say hype, but the whole kind of energy or the zeal of the ummah was there to see these videos are coming out right now. We can see literally live what is happening. Buildings are being bombed. The third intifada, as some have called it. Unfortunately, it's kind of expected that level of activism, or you could say activity on social media and with protests, etc., was it was bound to die down or get lesser a bit, because that's the way human beings are. Unfortunately, if you're exposed to something over a prolonged period of time, I think this was really kind of ongoing for between 4 to 6 weeks. After that, people are like, the ones who maybe were not ever really active on social media before, and then they were active when the uprising or this issue was at its peak, within the first 3 or 4 weeks, they've kind of maybe regressed or died down a little bit. But again, there are still people. I would still argue there are people that are still sharing, commenting, posting on social media. And I saw a petition go around, I think about 3 or 4 days ago, which literally said, Palestine is still bleeding, or Palestine is still burning, something like that, right? So these things are continuing, yes, maybe at a lesser extent, but then the onus is on the top social media accounts, the top activists, the dawah carriers, to continue calling for this message to say that this isn't ended yet, and this will not. We can never remain quiet until Palestine is completely liberated.
So just to pick you up on that point, because you mentioned it before, you talked about the solution to the problem of the Zionist occupation of Palestine being a complete Islamic liberation of that land. I think many people would agree with you on that. But given that the number of voices calling for solutions to the problem in Palestine seem to have died down a lot, doesn't that mean that the kind of activism we saw happening a couple of months ago isn't really helping us on the road to achieving that? Because it's sort of gone up and come back down, but the problem's continued. As you've said, the solution is liberation, but the energy doesn't seem to be there anymore. So, the signing of petitions and the protests and stuff, how much they really contribute to achieving that final end goal.
Yeah, so we've never said that social media or petitions or protests in and of themselves are the be-all and end-all, and if you just stick with social media or petitions or protests, then in a few weeks Palestine will be liberated. No, we never said that. Social media, petitions, protests, they have their place. Yeah, social media and activism and these, with these in these styles, they have their place. But there are also other parts of the method to liberate Palestine and to reestablish the Islamic State and liberate Palestine. It's not only social media protests and petitions, right? They serve a specific purpose, and that purpose is to get a certain message out there, en masse into the public, so that people can interact and kind of accept and adopt this idea as their own. But of course, we know, who's going to do the liberating, right? Who's going to do the freeing of Palestine? Who's going, when we talk about the Palestine being liberated, it's got to be liberated by a military. It's not going to be liberated by keyboard warriors, right? Pun intended, right? It's not going to be liberated by them. It's going to be liberated by, people who have power to do so in the militaries of the Muslim world. And again, they also keep up to date with the news. They're also human beings. They also come from families. They also realize what's going on, within the Muslim world, within Palestine, or in, anywhere where Muslims are being oppressed. So it's not the case that there is heavy kind of grip over them or surveillance over them to check what they're interacting with, which idea they're interacting with, etc. But you can't you can't have 100% blanket surveillance on everybody. And the whole world, literally the whole world, knew about what was happening in Palestine. Of course, the people in the armies and these kind of people, the influential, the army officers, the soldiers, they know what's going on as well. And for those who are sincere amongst them, for the genuine amongst them, well, you don't think it pains them like it pains us. Of course it does. For the genuine in the Muslim world, for the genuine in these high positions in the Muslim armies, the army officers, it pains them like it pains us, right? So, and this discussion and this idea, especially for them, remember they've come from a specific perspective of thinking, which is that we're a military for a reason, right? We have guns, weapons, armies, tanks for a reason. It's not for a fashion statement or just to march, on the gates of your border to prowess your power to your neighbors. This is to defend your own blood, your own land. Go on, sorry.
I can see the, it's very clear to see the link between the armies, what they're feeling, and the liberation of Palestine. But where I'm struggling to see a link is between what people tweet here, what people say in the streets here, when people sign petitions in the UK, and the army and the liberation. There seems to be a disconnect here. I'm still not seeing what is the place, because when I started this I said, was it all a waste? And you said, no, it wasn't all a waste, because it shows that we, as an Ummah, reached a new milestone and people are saying things and taking ideas they weren't taking before. But I'm struggling to see the link between that and the link between what you're saying now, which is about armies and liberation. The armies and liberation, I understand. That makes sense as a solution. That makes sense as the solution for Palestine and for the Ummah there. And I see where the army comes into that. But I don't see where what we were talking about before, where the activism and what people do here, especially online, links to that point.
Yeah, so and I wouldn't only limit it to the UK, by the way. This is social media and the globe are so interconnected with with the internet age, the internet era, and with social media and these kind of things, that I wouldn't just limit it to the UK. I would argue, across social media, across the Muslim world and Muslim in the non-Muslim world, right? Social media, when people en masse, they share their feelings, share their emotions, share their opinions on social media. That is the projection of the sentiments of the people. That is the projection of the opinions of the people. Right. So if you've got, certain videos which are going viral, or certain hashtags, as they, if you on Twitter, for example, you can see which hashtags are trending or going viral. This gives you a certain perception of how the Ummah is feeling, right? How the reaction that it has to a certain situation on the ground. Prime example of this, as we've seen before, the Arab Spring, 2010, 2011, whenever it started. Huge feelings, emotions, sentiment, thoughts, ideas shared on social media, as well as other platforms, but hugely influenced by social media. And again, this gives you, and especially the rulers, the leaders, the armies in the Muslim world, this gives them a perception of the sentiments of the people. Now, if the opinion and the sentiments of the people are in line with the ruling elite, happy days, right? They're happy, no problem. There's no threat to their power, because that's what they want to hold on to. The political elite, the ruling elite, be it the politicians or the army officers, they want to hold on to their power. If those sentiments are not in line, and the people are, starting to share their problem, their frustration, their emotions on social media or otherwise, then you've got a problem now, because you need to either create change or you need to really kind of clamp down on that sentiment. And like we saw in the Arab Spring, that emotion and that tipping point, that boiling point was so powerful that the ruling elite, it was basically overtaken and removed. And we actually saw the removal of, Gaddafi, Mubarak, Ben Ali from positions of power. Some of them have been in power for 30, 40 years, but because their views and their opinions and their sentiments were not in line with the people, and the people, they made that very, very apparent via, via social media and in the public discourse, they were removed, they were overthrown. So, social media and the sentiments of the people, they have a very powerful impact on the ruling elite, because the ruling elite, they understand if these emotions and sentiments are not if their call is not answered, then, if their demands are not met, then this is a direct threat to that authority.
But take in the Arab Spring, for example, the situation of Egypt, where there was no, the protesting against Hosni Mubarak, he was removed, and eventually the army actually stepped in. But when the army stepped in, you had Sisi taking power, who was a military general, and the situation is effectively no different from when it was under Mubarak, if it's not worse. So how can we say that when there's a voice of the people collectively, it caused real change, when actually the example of Egypt, as an example, is that it whatever change it caused was temporary, and the people who came about to bring change eventually brought change to revert things back to the status quo in the case of Sisi?
Yeah, so not only does there have to be a social media presence or a presence via protests, etc., the message has got to be clear, right? If the only thing you're calling for is a change, whatever that may be, as long as you get bread and water or bread and oil, I forgot what the people were calling for, then that's a demand that you can change a face, or you can change a few cabinet ministers, and you've got that change, but the system remained in place, and a few years down the line you go back to square one again. The call of the people on social media in the protest, it needs to be a clear one. We are not just demanding the removal of a face, or we are not just demanding the removal, in this case of Netanyahu, or the other two guys that have come into power. I forgot their names. That's not what we're demanding, because the status quo, the situation in the Muslim Ummah and in Palestine will be the same. That you've got an occupying force, and you've got billions of Muslims stateless, homeless, in fact, because they do not have a political system to represent them. So yeah, it's important to be active on social media and organizing protests, etc. But your message needs to be clear. This is a very, very, very important point. What are you calling for? What's the point of your social media? Okay, you put a video on the Zionist airstrikes on Gaza, or maybe you've had a protest about how bad, how many children have been killed, etc. Fine, but what's the point of your activity? What are you calling for? What are your demands? What are you trying to say? What message are you trying to give? And this is very important, because if you don't have a message, if the only thing you're doing is basically journalism, that's really what it is, journalism without any kind of solution, any kind of answers, then you're not really working for change. All you're doing is making people aware of a situation without telling them how to react to that situation, or how we should perceive that situation. So and again, not just limited to Palestine, but even the Arab Spring, or wherever we have found people trying to create change, that message has got to be very clear. We are demanding a systematic change, not only the removal of the personnel, but also the system itself. That we want to remove the system from a man-made, dictatorial, monarchical, secular, capitalist system to an Islamic one, right? And when you have a systematic change like that, then you will see, the fruits of that. What happened in Egypt, is that you had Mohammed Morsi, who came into power. He promised the people a certain message, and he didn't deliver up to that. And then, of course, there were certain economic problems in Egypt, and the people felt as though their demands had not really been met. And then, it was easy for the army to take power, and there wasn't really much resistance, because that message in the first place was not clear. The message in the first place was, we want change. They got that change, which lacked clarity in the first place. That change failed. It was bound to fail, because it wasn't built on on a strict Islamic premise. It failed, and then the army came in, and you're back to square one. So not only do you have to call for change, you need to know bang on what message are you calling for, what solution are you calling for. And when that demand is met, when that Islamic demand is met, then you will see the fruits of that, of course.
So I think what you're asking for is great. It's, you know, saying that everyone should be asking for the correct Islamic solution, the liberation of Palestine. But aren't you expecting a little bit too much of people? The number of differences and divisions that exist within, you know, different sections of the Ummah, of different personalities, and, you know, in social media, emotions and stuff tend to flare very high. Aren't you expecting too much of people, to expect people to unite on this one crystallized, clear solution to call for, to put pressure on the people who have the ability to make a change? Aren't you expecting too much, I guess what I'm asking here, aren't you expecting too much of the people calling for change to be unified, if that makes sense?
Well, I think the Ummah is already going in that direction anyway. So if you look, you know, from a few years ago, Islam was never even really perceived as a solution to, you know, the problem that we see today. You know, where was Islam perceived? Where was Islam as an alternative solution, you know, a few decades ago? And again, we find that each time these false systems, ideologies, ideas, you know, apparent miracles or dreams, each time they fail, that only strengthens, you know, the solution that we're calling for a few points. I mean, number one, if you look in the history of the last 100 years, this ummah has literally tasted the bitter fruits of every single system that you can think of. It's gone through monarchies, it's gone through iron fist dictatorships, it's gone through Baathism, it's gone through communism, it's gone through staunch capitalist democracies, secular, you name it, the ummah has done it, you name it, the ummah has been there, and each time it's failed. You know, each time it's failed. You can't point to any country today and say, wow, this is a leading country of the world because of system X, Y, and Z. They're all failed. And again, by the very nature of a Muslim, the very aqidah of the Muslim ummah, it always resorts them back to Islam. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, every single human being, every single Muslim on the face of the earth has an absolutely crystal clear idea that this is the khilafah, this is the ruling system, this is the economic system, etc. But you don't need the entire ummah to, you know, have an absolute perfect understanding of the way that the Islamic khilafah is going to function. For us and for the, you know, to gain that nusra, public opinion needs to be in favor of having an Islamic state, of living under an Islamic khilafah, of wanting to live by Islam. And we find the trends. We see that. We see that in Egypt. In fact, you know, as we mentioned this example before, the reason as to why they voted for Ikhwan Muslimin and Muhammad Morsi was because they believe that Islam is you know, what holds the solution to their problems. Even though, of course, we know that, you know, that Islam, it wasn't applied as it should have been applied. But the fact is that the Ummah voted or selected that group and that party because of their sentiments and because of their love for Islam. We see the same in Tunisia, that they voted for Al-Nahda. You know, we see the same in Pakistan, where they voted for a man, Imran Khan, who was calling for Riyasat-e Medina, you know, the Medina model state. And, you know, that throughout the Muslim world, you find that all the politicians, Turkey, you know, again, all of these different politicians are using Islam to try and have some kind of connection with the sentiments of the people, because the people want to live by Islam. So, and I'm not asking too much at all. The Ummah is already going in that right direction. But, you know, what I'm saying is there'll come a time where the Ummah, and it is right now, gaining more and more clarity of what an Islamic solution actually looks like. Is it just the case that you can do azan in parliament and you're an Islamic state? You know, is it the case that you can just recite Quran before your speech and you know, it's an Islamic state? Or do we, you know, are we demanding more than that? And the Ummah is starting to demand more than that now. You know, so I wouldn't say it's too much at all. We're already on that journey. We're all going, you know, alhamdulillah, we're already going in that right direction.
You just mentioned some instances where evidence from places like Tunisia and Turkey and Pakistan and Egypt showcases that this idea is prevalent in the public opinion. We've actually got a question coming from one of our viewers on public opinion, which I want to put to you. So from Francois Gauthier, apologies if I pronounced that name wrong, who said, Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Does social media affect public opinion positively or negatively? And I'd just like to say Jazakallah khair for watching, brother, and sharing your opinion. Yes, so does social media affect public opinion positively or negatively in your opinion? When we're talking about the importance of having these ideas present in public opinion.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of mainstream media, you know, that has a heavy influence on public opinion from the people that control the mainstream media, right? Social media is slightly different. Yes, it's still regulated to some degree, and of course, you know, the more money you have, you can kind of twist the algorithm or even the advertisements, etc., into your way. But social media, it gives the common man like me and you a platform or a voice to, you know, to get a certain message out there. And, you know, in a good way this time round, I mean, I would use evidence of what we've seen, you know, what we saw in Ramadan and the weeks following that. Social media impacted this whole discussion in a very positive way. Because I'm telling you now, the BBC are not going to show the video of tens of thousands of Muslims in Palestine calling for the Pak army, right? They're not going to show that. Sky News, Al Jazeera even, they're not going to show the thousands, literally the hundreds and thousands of tweets, of comments, of posts, of snaps that the Ummah has been calling very, very powerfully, demanding that their armies move to liberate Masjid al-Aqsa.
But
so mainstream media...
You make an interesting point here about mainstream media, that mainstream media is, you know, by definition of being mainstream media, it's going to reflect certain opinions, certain viewpoints. Generally, it's going to affect the viewpoints of the country that they're based in, the government, the state system that runs that country. We know that the systems in the countries in the Western world are supportive of the Zionist occupation in Palestine. It suits their interests. So when you're saying that individuals can make their opinion known on social media, we're talking about individual people with no particular influence on like a wider scale going up against the apparatus of a state. You're talking about, and this doesn't just apply to mainstream media, by the way, either, because when you're talking about people raising certain opinions, such as the opinion that Islam is a solution, liberation necessary, well then the state will employ apparatus to make sure that its own narrative is the only one that gets out there. For example, the Prevent program. If you make certain comments on Twitter, if you make certain comments on Facebook, either the site itself will shut you down, or what could also happen is you might be subject to the penalty of law in the country you live in. So how likely are you to be successful when you're talking about individuals using social media and personal accounts to go up against mainstream media and the state apparatuses that are telling a different narrative and passing on a different idea?
Yeah, so I'm not saying, sorry, just to clarify, I'm not saying that social media in and of itself, you know, can completely counter the government propaganda and the mainstream media, you know, tool used, and, you know, it's a completely counteract to that. I'm not saying that at all. Of course, we know social media itself is regulated. You know, some of my own posts, many of my own posts have been, you know, kind of deleted or removed from Instagram. We saw actually, you know, even with the Palestine weeks, you know, leading after Ramadan, many cases of people tweeting, supporting, posting about Palestine and the Zionists removed, right? To try and skew a certain opinion, to try and skew the opinion of the public. But this is the point that I'm making, right? Which is that if the opinion of the public is already been shaped, you know, the opinion in the Ummah already exists that Palestine needs to be free. Already exists that the Zionists are occupying force. Already exists that there needs to be liberation from the Muslim armies. They are now projecting that opinion on social media. It's not a counteract to mainstream media, etc. But I would argue, in fact, that majority of the youth, or a lot of the youth, they use social media more than they use mainstream media. I can tell you that much. The youth, especially in the West, in the UK, for example, they are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook more than they are on BBC or Sky News, or, you know, reading the Daily Mail. Again, you mentioned this thing of, you know, it's just one or two people with maybe a little influence here or there. No, I would disagree. You've got accounts on there that have hundreds of thousands, 500,000, millions of followers who, you know, they shape and influence the opinion of their followers.
Just to clarify what I was saying, I wasn't downplaying the fact that people have many followers or that they can shape opinions of people. What I was saying is that an individual, even if that individual has a million followers or plus, is going to struggle to go up against institutions that are backed by a country, by a government, right? So if you're an individual with a million followers and Twitter, Facebook, or the British government and the Prevent program can shut you down like that for making a comment about Palestine, then how much influence do you really have, and how likely are the ideas you call for to be successful?
I think the answer of that is in the trend that we've seen over the last 10, 20 years. You know, there's been a massive campaign of fear, of propaganda, of Prevent, like you mentioned. Prevent, a slap in the face of Prevent when they've been marginalizing, alienating, creating fear, frightening Muslims, trying to, you know, in some cases taking their children off them for holding certain ideas. And literally, you know, a few weeks ago, you've got protests in primary school in the UK, organized by Muslims, standing on the canteen tables, shouting Allahu Akbar, free, free Palestine. You know, the answer we can see the answer already, you know, in the trend over the last 10 years, that the more this propaganda, etc., has increased, that has not, of course, you know, it may be a bit of a setback, but, you know, they plan and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans, and we find that in the UK, even in the UK itself, they've been called out, you know, or in the US, I should say, you know, why are we selling weapons to people that are blatantly, you know, causing atrocities of massacring children, creating genocide, etc. So of course, it's expected that, you know, the state apparatus and the government will try to clamp down and really hush these kind of opinions. But the hypocrisy and the corruption and the oppression is so blatant, bro. Abdullah, is so blatant. What are you going to do when you've got hundreds of thousands of people that are tweeting, commenting, posting about this? You know, unless you shut down, you know, social media once and for all. But of course, we know that it makes a lot of money, so they're not going to do that anytime soon. So what are you going to do? Yeah, fine. It's expected that you clamp down and you try to really marginalize these views. But when these views become mainstream, as they have been, you know, what are you going to do then? What is the government going to do then? And like I said before, yeah, mainstream media can try and downplay it a bit, but the ummah's not stupid, right? The ummah's quite on the ball, quite sharp at the moment. Even, for example, just a few days ago, the EU court decided that, you know, the workplaces can choose to ban Muslim women wearing the hijab. This wasn't broadcasted on mainstream media anyway, you know, but on social media it was making rounds, especially from the Muslim accounts. Everybody was talking about it, you know. And if you just go through the comments, you can see that the ummah sees this blatant hypocrisy, and it doesn't get its news from BBC or Sky News, as I've said before. So, you know, what are the governments and the mainstream media going to do when they've already tried this propaganda and this blackening of our name for so many decades? Yet we've seen just in the last few weeks that went by, this has failed and it's failing, and the ummah is becoming more clear and more crystallized about what a real solution for Palestine looks like.
So this is something I want to cover before we finish up the show, inshallah. You're saying the ummah is becoming more clear, more crystallized, and you said previously that the solution is liberation by an army. You've mentioned this whole point, and you've talked about how, you know, activism, social media, public displays of protest, these kind of things, they build opinion, or they put pressure on influential people to make movements. Before we finish up, I want to ask you plainly, simply, in the clearest possible terms, what is your advice or your suggestions to what we, individuals like you and me, sitting here in the UK, all the non-Muslim countries, all the Muslim countries as this reaches them, what can we do? What's the next steps we need to take to reach the next milestone and the next level, if you like, in taking the steps forward towards a solution?
Yeah, I think I'm going to end on three brief, I'll try to keep it brief, take-home points. Number one, even being part of a dawah, spreading a message, getting a certain opinion or a voice out there is a hugely, hugely rewardable act. And some people claim, look at the audacity of these youth raising their hands saying that we have the solution to Palestine or we have the solution to world poverty. The audacity of these youth. Well, I say actually no. The youth in this day and age who carry a certain message that is completely adverse and opposed to the current status quo in the world, hugely rewardable act. Hugely rewardable act. It's an immense reward, equal or similar to the reward of the Sahaba, because it was the Sahaba Ajmain who have been the only generation, who were the first generation of youth who are calling for a systematic change, for an ideological change, to see Islam on that top spot, and for us to even take a fraction of the reward that they took as an honor for us, which leads me on to the second point of, yes, social media, protests, petitions, getting a message out there, being a da'i, an activist, and invited to a certain call is brilliant. But you need to be crystal clear on what it is that you're carrying. What is that message that you're talking about? What is the solution? What is this invitation? That is very, very important, because if you're always just, being an activist or posting or talking without real clarity or without a real solution, you're not really going to achieve anything. You're going to be neither here nor there. You're going to be wasting a lot of time, a lot of effort. If you have a certain direction that here we are, this is where I want to get to, these are the steps that I need to do in between, that gives you a very, very clear focus from an Islamic perspective, of course, of, where we are now, where we need to go. And final, number three, even for carrying a vision, this vision of carrying a certain message within the Islamic pretext of the Islamic call, we shouldn't ever just limit it to Palestine, right? Oppression, corruption, occupation exists outside of Palestine, plagued the Muslim world. You see, just look at what happened is happening in Yemen, in Syria, in Somalia, and even outside of the Muslim world, in Central African Republic, in Myanmar, Burma, and Xinjiang province, that oppression and corruption, even on non-Muslims, all over the world. So our vision and our message of Islam shouldn't just be limited to a certain region or even the Muslim world or even Muslims. We need to have an absolute global vision. If we believe that we are carrying Din al-Haq, just like the Americans, they believe that they are on, the correct and perfect way of life, and they've tried to, give this message to the rest of the world. We have more right than they do in thinking that we have Din al-Haq, because we have Din al-Haq. We're convinced by that. We can prove that. So don't ever just limit Palestine, these kind of Islamic solutions and activism to Palestine. We need to have a global vision. So in summary, they are the three. Number one, be a dawah carrier. Have a call, have a message, have a solution. Number two, be crystal clear about what that message and what that solution is from an Islamic point of view. And number three, don't just limit this Islamic solution to Palestine. Have a global vision. And, inshallah, we can achieve, and we will achieve, a real solution and real khair in the future. And we, inshallah, will be part of that reward. We'll have a huge take in that reward. That is my summary take-home message.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Luqman, for joining me today, for discussing this issue, for giving us an insight, inshallah, into and especially with that take-home message, some actions that we can take forward.